The cold had become something he no longer felt. It had etched itself so deep into his bones that it became more of a companion than an enemy. Thomas sat on the edge of the bench near 3rd and Maple, his back hunched, eyes scanning the street like a soldier still on watch. In a way, he was. He had once been a sergeant in the army, decorated with a few ribbons that meant more to others than they did to him now. Time, and the weight of years spent surviving with nothing but memories and silence, had made him forget what recognition ever felt like. What warmth felt like. His old army jacket, faded olive green, patched in 3 places and missing a button, was the only thing he'd kept from that other life. It still had the name tag, Walker. No one called him that anymore. He was just the quiet old man who slept under the bridge and didn't bother anyone. That morning had been particularly cold. Frost had painted the bench metal, and Thomas's breath came out in long ghostly ribbons. The sun hadn't yet crested the buildings, and traffic hadn't begun its usual noise. That's when he saw the man, a younger one, maybe in his late 20s, sitting on the curb across from him, head down, shivering through a hoodie far too thin for the wind. Thomas watched. He could tell the signs. This one hadn't been homeless long. His clothes were dirty but not yet worn through. His hair was still neatly cut, and his shoes still had laces. But the look in his eyes when he glanced up, Thomas knew that look. Lost, humiliated, and just starting to understand that the world didn't stop when you fell. Thomas stood up slowly, joints groaning in protest, and walked over. The man didn't even look up again until Thomas was close enough to cast a shadow over him. "Cold?" Thomas asked. The man nodded. "You hungry?" Another nod. Thomas said nothing more. He just took off his jacket. Slowly, carefully, he shrugged it from his shoulders and held it out. The man looked at it, puzzled. "You sure?" he asked, eyes flicking to Thomas's thin shirt underneath. Thomas gave a soft chuckle. "It's kept me alive this long. I think it's got one more mission in it." The man hesitated, then reached out and took it, pulling it around himself. It hung a little long, sleeves down past his wrists. He hugged it close and shivered once before sighing, deeply. "Thank you," he whispered. Thomas just nodded, then turned and walked back to the bench, now bare-armed against the wind. He didn't say much the rest of the day. That night he slept colder than usual, curled up in the corner of the underpass where the wind didn't cut as sharp. He didn't regret it. The jacket had always belonged to someone who needed it more. In a way, he was glad to pass it on. Days went by. The man didn't come back, and Thomas didn't expect him to. People came and went in this city. Sometimes they left, sometimes they vanished. He didn't hold it against anyone. Weeks passed. The weather warmed. Thomas managed to scavenge an old flannel shirt from a donation pile outside a church. It wasn't the same, but it was something. He spent his days the same way, sitting, watching, remembering. People passed, some with pity, some with indifference. He always kept his gaze level, never asking for anything. He hadn't begged in years. One late afternoon, nearly a month later, a shadow fell across his lap again. Thomas looked up, expecting just another passerby. But there he was, the young man. Clean-shaven, hair trimmed, a jacket that wasn't his anymore wrapped neatly around him. But more than that, his eyes were different now. Steady. Confident. Alive. "Hey," the man said softly. "You remember me?" Thomas smiled faintly. "Course I do. That jacket doesn't forget faces." The man knelt beside the bench, lowering himself like someone about to kneel at an altar. "I wanted to tell you something. That day, I was going to jump." Thomas blinked. The man went on, voice steady. "I lost my job, my apartment, my girlfriend. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. That morning, I came to the bridge, not to sit, just to end it. I didn't think anyone would notice. Then you came. You gave me the jacket. But more than that, you saw me. Like I was still worth something. Thomas didn't speak. He just listened, heart thudding. I went to the shelter that night. Got help. Found a program for veterans. Turns out my dad served too, so they took me in. I've got a place now. I've got a job starting Monday. I came back to say thank you. Thomas looked at him a long moment. You gave the jacket a better mission than I ever could. The man shook his head. No. You gave me a second chance. The city buzzed quietly around them. For the first time in years, Thomas felt something warm settle inside him. Not the jacket, not the sun, but something deeper. Hope. He didn't need thanks. He never had. But hearing those words, healing words, they mattered. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. That's my dad. Said he served with a Sergeant Walker. That you? Thomas took the photo. His fingers trembled. He saw the familiar face, younger, sharper, full of life. I knew him, he said quietly. He saved my life once. The man smiled. Guess you returned the favor. After that afternoon, Thomas felt a strange lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The jacket had found its purpose, and somehow, so had he. The days that followed were not without hardship, but something in Thomas had shifted, a small ember of hope flickering against the chill of his reality. He continued his routine, wandering the streets, sometimes talking to strangers, sometimes just sitting quietly on his favorite bench. But now, when he passed the homeless shelter, he didn't just glance away, he paused, sometimes even stepping inside to help with small tasks. The young man, who introduced himself as Michael, came by often. Each visit was different. Sometimes they talked about life, other times about the past, and sometimes simply shared silence. Michael told Thomas about the challenges he'd faced growing up in a broken home, how he'd lost everything after his mother died, and how that jacket, Thomas's jacket, had been a lifeline in more ways than one. He said it reminded him of the stories his father used to tell, stories about courage, sacrifice, and loyalty. Thomas listened with a quiet pride, realizing that even without medals or honors, the jacket was a symbol, a bridge between past and present. One chilly evening, Michael invited Thomas to a small gathering at the community center, a place for veterans and locals alike to share stories, get support, and find camaraderie. Thomas hesitated. It had been a long time since he'd been inside a place like that, but Michael's encouragement won him over. Inside, the walls were decorated with photos of soldiers, some smiling, some solemn, many long gone. The room buzzed with conversations, laughter, and the occasional tear. Thomas felt out of place at first, but as Michael introduced him to others, he began to relax. He met men and women who had served, who had faced demons similar to his own. They shared stories of battles abroad, and battles at home, of loss, regret, and redemption. One man, named Jack, told Thomas about the importance of speaking out, of not letting the silence swallow them whole. Thomas shared a little about his own story, the years spent drifting, the loneliness that had wrapped around him like a shroud. And about the jacket. The jacket, he said, was more than just fabric and patches, it was a reminder of who he had been, and who he could still be. Over the weeks, Thomas found himself drawn back to the center. He began attending weekly meetings, sometimes even volunteering to help organize events or cook meals. It was a small step, but it meant everything. Meanwhile, Michael's life continued to improve. He found steady work at a local workshop, reconnected with estranged family members, and even started taking classes to finish his GED. The two men became inseparable, almost like family. Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. He started writing letters, sometimes to his old army buddies, sometimes to Michael's father, whom he had never met but felt connected to through the shared history. In these letters, he poured out his hopes, regrets, and the lessons he had learned. One day, Michael came to Thomas with an idea. Why don't we start a project? Something to help other vets who are struggling. Thomas thought about it. There were so many like him and Michael, lost and forgotten by a world that had moved on. Maybe a place, Michael said, where people can come and find help. Food, shelter, friendship. Thomas smiled for the first time in a long time. Let's do it. They began reaching out to local charities, churches, and veterans organizations. It wasn't easy. Paperwork, funding, skepticism, it all weighed heavily. But slowly, the idea took shape. A small community center dedicated to helping homeless and struggling veterans, staffed by those who understood their pain firsthand. As the project grew, so did Thomas's own sense of belonging. The jacket still hung in his small, shared room at the shelter, a symbol not just of survival, but of hope renewed. One afternoon, while sorting through donations, Thomas came across a box labeled "Letters Home." Curious, he opened it and found hundreds of letters, some decades old, others recent. He began reading them, feeling the voices of so many soldiers, their fears and dreams, their love and loss. Inspired, he decided to start a letter-writing campaign, connecting veterans with pen pals around the country. The letters became a lifeline, bringing light to many dark days. Months later, during a community event celebrating the new center's opening, Michael pulled Thomas aside. "There's someone here who wants to meet you." Thomas turned to see a woman approaching, her eyes bright, her smile hesitant but warm. She introduced herself as Linda. She held out a worn photo, the same one Michael had shown Thomas months ago. "I'm Michael's mother," she said softly. "And I want to thank you." Tears welled up in Thomas's eyes. The jacket, the project, the letters, they had all led to this moment. To connection. To healing. As the sun set outside, casting golden light across the room, Thomas felt the warmth of something he thought was lost forever. Family. Purpose. A chance to rewrite the final chapters of his story. And for the first time in many years, he believed the best was yet to come. The months that followed were filled with both challenges and small victories. The community center Thomas and Michael had started became a beacon of hope for many veterans who felt forgotten, just like Thomas once did. Every week, more people came through the doors seeking companionship, assistance, or simply a place where they could be understood. Thomas found himself busier than he had been in years, coordinating efforts, speaking at events, and building relationships that transcended his past loneliness. Despite the progress, there were moments when the weight of his memories pressed heavily upon him. Late at night, after the last visitor had left and the doors were locked, he would sit alone in the dim light of the small office, the jacket draped over the back of his chair. The fabric seemed to hold the echoes of a life long lived, the battles, the losses, and the friendships that had shaped him. One evening, as Thomas looked out the window at the city skyline, Michael came in with a letter in his hand. "This came for you today," he said, placing it on the desk. The envelope was old, yellowed, and addressed in handwriting Thomas recognized instantly, his own, from decades ago. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing a letter he had written but never sent. The letter was addressed to a woman named Eleanor, a name Thomas hadn't spoken aloud in years. As he read the words he had penned long ago, memories flooded back, their time together before the war, the promises made, and the painful silence that followed his disappearance. Michael sat quietly, letting Thomas relive the past in his own time. After finishing, Thomas looked up, his eyes glistening with tears. "I never sent this," he whispered. "I thought you would never want to hear from me again." Michael smiled gently. "Maybe it's not too late." Inspired by this, Thomas decided to search for Eleanor. With Michael's help, he began tracking down leads, reaching out to old contacts, and scouring records. The journey was difficult, filled with dead ends and moments of doubt, but Thomas felt alive in a way he hadn't in decades. Months passed, and finally, they found her living quietly in a small town miles away. Thomas's heart pounded as they made the trip together. When Eleanor opened the door, the years melted away in her surprised smile and tear-filled eyes. They talked for hours, sharing stories of the years lost, the pain endured, and the unexpected joys found along the way. Eleanor explained how she had never stopped hoping he might one day return, how she had kept his letters and photographs close to her heart. The reunion was bittersweet, a reminder of what had been and what still could be. Thomas knew they could never reclaim the past, but they could build something new, a friendship grounded in forgiveness and understanding. Back at the center, Thomas shared the news with the veterans who had become his new family. They celebrated together, reminded once again of the power of connection and second chances. The jacket, now worn but cherished, symbolized not just a soldier's past, but a man's resilience and capacity to heal. Thomas continued to work tirelessly for the community, helping others find their path back from the shadows. Michael grew into a leader, inspired by the courage he had witnessed. And though the road was never easy, both men understood the true meaning of family, loyalty, and hope. On a quiet afternoon, as Thomas sat on the bench outside the center, Eleanor by his side and Michael nearby, he looked down at the jacket resting on his lap. It was more than just a piece of clothing, it was a testament to survival, to kindness passed on, and to the unexpected ways a simple act can change a life forever. Thomas smiled, feeling at peace. For the first time in many years, he was home.